Have you ever tried to paint mist or fog only to end up with a flat, muddy looking mess? That magical, ethereal quality seems impossible to capture, until now. This foggy mountain valley scene that I'm going to show you how to paint isn't just for professional artists, it's for everyone, even complete beginners, and completely achievable even if you've struggled with atmospheric scenes before. In this video, I'm going to show you my simple 6-step process that turns this challenging subject into a painting that you'd be proud to hang on your wall. Now I'm sketching out my composition here using burnt sienna with a bit of oleo gel, so this is going to help with the flow of the paint and it's a non-toxic medium. The oil paints I'm using are Blue Ridge oils, and if you want to get some I'll put a link in the description box below. And I'm painting on an 11 by 14 inch linen panel, which you can get from canvaspanels.com. I'll put the link in the description box below if you want to get some. So step number 1 is to paint your dark values and shadows first. And if you've watched some of my other videos, you'll hear me say this in every one, but I've just found that this is the easiest way to create depth and distance in your paintings and get those tonal values correct. And value is how light or dark your subject is. We'll find the darkest darks in the foreground along with the lightest lights. Then as landforms recede, darks aren't as dark and lights aren't as light. And this is going to be especially important in a mountain scene like this, and also when you're painting mist and fog. Now this painting is all about conveying feeling in the atmosphere, and it's inspired by a mountain valley near Queenstown in southern New Zealand. I used some reference photos to create the composition, and I first of all designed the composition in my sketchbook to begin with, so this helps me to see the road ahead. Now what I'm doing here is I'm painting the shadows in the distance, and all through the painting so far I've been using combinations of ultramarine blue with burnt sienna, a little alizarin crimson to give the mix of violet tint, and titanium white to get the value that I want. So for those lighter tones in the distance I've been using more titanium white in my mix, and in general I've been using more ultramarine blue so that the shadows have more of a blue cast to them. I think this way you can't go wrong, and then that way you're not going to end up with muddy looking colours. Now this scene overall, there's not really much detail, it's all about conveying the atmosphere, so I specifically wanted to go for more loose brushwork with bold marks to convey the atmosphere of the scene. And this leads to step number 2, and that's to use loose brushwork, at least in the blocking stage. Once you've finished the blocking in stage and your painting's dry, then you can add detail if you want to. But if you're struggling with your paintings being overly detailed, then the easiest thing to do is just to start off with loose, bold brush marks and use the biggest brushes that you can get away with or that you feel comfortable with. That way your painting's going to be nice and loose to begin with. Don't worry about detail at all. You can add this later on if you want to. Now let's talk a little bit more about the shadows and the tonal values here, because really that's what's making this scene. I'm using some cool blue colours here to communicate the frostiness of the landscape below, and for this I've used a mix of ultramarine blue with yellow ochre, a little bit of phthalo green, and also some titanium white. I also balanced the green with a little bit of alizarin crimson because the red in the alizarin crimson is opposite to green on the colour wheel, so it helps to make the colour look more natural. Now all the while whilst I'm painting this, I'm thinking about values, not so much with colours. You can get away with not using the correct colour so long as your values are good, but if your values aren't right then your painting's just gonna look flat. So basically there's some rules in the landscape with values, and this was summarised by John Carlson in his book Carlson's Guide to Landscape Painting. He said that the arch of the sky is some of the lightest values in the landscape. Then the ground planes of the grass is also relatively light in value. The slanting planes of the mountains are getting darker in value, and the upright planes, which are the trees, are the darkest values in the landscape. And I think this is so easy to remember. Since I read that, I've kept that in my head, especially when I'm painting outdoors. It's really helped to improve my landscape paintings. Now then, step number 3. We've got all the shadows in, so now we're going to paint the areas in light. So I've just started by painting the highlights on the mountains. So this is the snow that's reflecting in the full sunlight, but I need to push those mountains into the distance, so I mixed a little bit of burnt sienna into my titanium white mix for the snow on the mountains. That's just going to help it to recede into the distance. And then for the sky, I used a mix of ultramarine blue with a little cobalt teal and some titanium white. Now the main sunlit areas in this painting are the mountains, which at the time was winter, so the mountains just look harsh and quite barren. There's a species of grass that grows on the mountains here in New Zealand, and it's called tussock grass, and it has this straw coloured tone to it. Now, if you're struggling with your landscape paintings and you're having difficulty with creating depth and distance, then check out my free landscape painting blueprint, where I show you my process for creating a landscape painting that you can apply to your own paintings. It's totally free. All you got to do is just click the link below and I'll send it over to you. Enjoy. Now back to the painting, and I've started painting some of the trees that are poking up through the mist and catching some of that early morning winter sun. Some of the trees still had just the last of their leaves on them, but most of them were either conifer trees or just deciduous trees that had lost all their leaves. So I've painted some golden tones in there using a mix of yellow ochre with a little alizarin crimson, some titanium white and some ultramarine blue. Now on to step number 4. So the painting was dry by this point, and this is where I started the next stage in this painting, which is the modelling stage and adding details. So modelling is where we're beginning to add details and refinements to individual zones in the painting, so often building these up in layers. Now, as I said, there's not too much detail in this painting anyway, but I wanted to capture some of the density of these stands of trees there, and also convey the fog and mist shrouding the trees, but also the frost as well that's on them. The landscape below is frosty, especially in that mountain shadow. So I'm using smaller brushes here, for example number 3 bristle, filbert and flat brushes, just to communicate some of the tree canopies. Now, as I say, when I paint, I always think in terms of tonal values, lights and darks. And when looking at this painting with a fresh pair of eyes, I kind of felt that the landscape below in the foreground was just a little bit too light. Now, keeping in mind that grass is some of the lighter values in the landscape and it is covered in frost, but I really wanted to make more of an impact and have more contrast between the darker areas in the painting and the illuminated area of the low cloud. The way we can convey a strong sense of light in a painting is to have something darker surrounding it, so creating that contrast. This is why when you have a scene with dark shadows and then light lights, that it can look really impactful in a painting and quite striking. So we should always think about using shadows, and as much as anything else, it makes painting landscapes a lot easier. Now, another thing I wanted to do with the frosty ground below in the foreground was to create some textures, and I'm doing this by making bold brush marks with various brushes. So for example, here I was using a number 5 synthetic flat brush, which is going to have a more defined edge to it, and I was also using bristle brushes as well, but just adding more layers to communicate the frosty ground below. And although I'm using some lighter tones here, I'm still using pretty much similar colours that I used in the blocking stage, which was combinations of ultramarine blue, a little yellow ochre, some phthalo green, titanium white and a little alizarin crimson. Now for this part of the painting, there was lots of clumps of grass that are covered in frost, and I just wanted to imply a little bit of detail here, so I was using a number 3 synthetic flat brush just to mark in some of those shadows and then the highlights. After that, I let the painting dry, and this leads to step number 5. So this is refining the painting. At this point in the painting, I'm starting to think about getting it finished, and one of the things I was doing was just adding more lighter tone to the illuminated side of the mountains, again using similar colours that I used to begin with, a mix of yellow ochre with some alizarin crimson, some titanium white and a little ultramarine blue. Because those mountains are so far away, there's really not much detail, and certainly in a painting like this, We don't want to be adding too much detail to the mountains anyway, because it's just going to start becoming confusing on the eyes. So whenever you're painting something in the distance, I think it's best to just go for minimal detail. You can save all your details for the foreground. Then after that, I was adding more refinements to the painting, so defining more the shapes of the trees, restating some dark values here. For the trees, I was using combinations of ultramarine blue with yellow ochre, a little alizarin crimson, and titanium white where it is needed. Just mixing some subtle greens there. Then once this was done, it leads on to the last step, step number 6, and this is where we're saving our lightest values until last. So I painted the lighter tones on the cloud layer with a mix of titanium white and a little yellow ochre, and also added some highlights to the snow in the mountains. So I hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to learn more about painting mountains, then check out this video here. I'll see you in the next video.